Okay, we're on the show now, and it's, I don't know, I guess there's a bit of a theme developing here on today's show, Tesla, because we've got Ahmed Younis here, who you're running the EOS blockchain Meetup. Is that what it is, or?
Yeah, that's right. We're developing decentralized applications on the EOS platform.
Okay.
Yeah, on the mainnet.
Great. Okay, so I mean, we were just talking a little bit before we came on, and that you originally got involved on the Ethereum platform. Were you an investor, or were you actually doing development on Ethereum?
It was sort of just like hacking around, playing around with the development, but I didn't really create any real use cases on the Ethereum platform. It was just I was just very much like in favor of them because they were pushing the envelope of what blockchain can achieve, and they were like the second generation blockchain. So they
after Bitcoin,
Yeah.
And then they came out and they were like, what I always call it, like a decentralized programming environment, essentially, right? So you could build applications on the blockchain. That's what Ethereum was intended for.
Yeah. But they realized that because they're second generation, they were still in a new space, and they were entering this new concept of having a world virtual machine. Mm-hmm. And because of that, people really like the idea of being able to have immutable code on the blockchain, where it's code is law. Mm-hmm. They introduced that concept, and a lot of people really were investing into that idea. However, they were still struggling in their own method. Like, I'm still a huge Ethereum supporter, but they were still struggling with their governance, like with their DAO hack that they had to fork the network because. So they still were early adopters of the technology, so they still had a lot of room to develop.
Yeah. So then along comes EOS.
Yeah.
And what was your? Can you maybe just give a brief description of what EOS is compared to Ethereum, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
And why you got interested in EOS.
Yeah.
There's been a fair amount of hype about it.
Can we actually take a step back for the novices that are watching us today, or that you'll share this information with? Take a step back and go, okay, so you've got EOS right now, you've got Ethereum, and you've transitioned from Bitcoin to Ethereum. Like, tell me, like, okay, Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. I see what you mean. Mm-hmm. So, first generation blockchains, such as Bitcoin, which started it all, really proved the concept of, okay, let's have a distributed ledger. So, rather than having a central bank control or central bank control how much everybody has in their wallet, let's have a distributed ledger that says how much everybody has in their wallet. So, it created the concept of Bitcoin as the gold, digital gold. That's the first generation blockchain. And then they realized that we could do so much more with blockchain. Rather than having a distributed ledger, let's have a distributed virtual machine. So the second generation blockchains introduced the concept of, like, each block would represent the state of a computer. And the computer would be spread all across the world. And then all of a sudden we can make computer programs running on this decentralized blockchain. And that's really what Ethereum created, and then a whole bunch of other second-generation blockchains copied that concept of allowing you to have execute code on the blockchain and be able to run transactions. And then that second generation had a lot of other problems that they came across, such as like having to burn gas, or they call it like, so the Ethereum second-generation blockchain is like every time your code runs, you have to spend a fee. So it makes like decent applications really hard to develop, because it'll be very costly for every time the application has a transaction, like having an upvote or writing something or doing a transaction. It would cost money, and usually there's like millions of transactions happening on.
I mean, they did that for a reason, because there was some limitations. The blockchain had limitations, so they didn't want to have people running gratuitous code or actions on the network. So they wanted to build in a bit of a restriction. If you're going to run something, you got to make it worth, you got to put a little bit of money into the system. Skin in the game, yeah.
So talk to me about applications, though. Like, I mean, so I'm a business owner, and I want to start using Ethereum. I mean, actually, I've noticed this right now. Like, so that's why I'm going to use this as an example. Dentacoin. they're like an Ethereum-based incentive, you know, tool to get people to go to the dentist and actually use services at the dentist and reward them for it, right? So I'm a business owner, like a dentist, for example, and I want to deliver some type of transactional program through Ethereum or would it be EOS now? That
Okay.
like
So yeah, let's just take the conversation a little bit different direction
Okay,
for now. Okay,
go.
and I'll tell you why.
Tell me.
Just because what you're talking about is more of a specific application or a token on, for example, the Ethereum network. So we're kind of dealing in a little more theoretical conversation here. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So development became quicker, and it's easier for you to be able to verify your code. It'll be easier for you to see, okay, you're more familiar with the code, you're more familiar with like the syntax, you have more networks, libraries to work with, such as the .NET. You could take advantage
really?
of like Microsoft
Okay.
.NET. So that was really huge.
And you've got an existing user base, essentially, of existing coders that can now easily transfer those skills to blockchain programming.
Exactly.
Okay.
so it provides for more sort of inclusive input.
Yeah. And like the people who really push blockchains to the next level are the developers. So like when Windows was launched, Windows 98, it was like it didn't really have a lot of productive tools until all the third-party developers came in, and now all the companies have to have a website. Everybody has to have programs that they take advantage of the computer, and then that's when mass adoption kicked in.
So like open source, making it open to people that
Wouldn't otherwise have access to it because they've got to learn all types of
like
new
for
computer
Ethereum,
language
you have
and
to
all kinds of
create.
stuff, right?
You've got to teach a whole new generation, a whole new programming language.
Right.
Right. So that's a limitation. Right.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Exactly.
So this takes advantage of lived experience and expertise more so than some of the newer stuff where people are sort of, well, I guess, you know, taking advantage of what you don't know. I think what you're talking about makes it less likely for that kind of stuff to happen because you've got more expertise like contributing to the whole vision.
Exactly. Like you'd honestly have a handful of, not a handful, a bit more than that. Like
Yeah.
a very small minority of Solidity developers across the world. Whereas C++ or .NET programmers, you'd have like millions of programmers all over the world. So it just creates that you take advantage of an ecosystem that was already developed.
Right.
So that helps you with like the scalability, and that's like
Big
it's
time.
really huge for blockchains to be for like programmers to start developing a blockchain. So that's number one. The second point is the idea of EOS is the petroleum or gasoline. So you'd have to have some type of your token is like you have to burn gas to be able to have your application transact on the blockchain. Bitcoin was like gold, just transferring value from person to person. EOS and other third generation blockchains, the ones that have like the staking protocol, is like real estate. So you purchase like your EOS token, and you're allowed to stake that amount and take advantage of the resources available on the network. So if I say like, let's say if I own 1% of the EOS token, I would be able to have access to 1% of the CPU that's being devoted to the network, the bandwidth,
I see.
and then there's a separate mechanism for RAM, which is like the memory, to be able to host databases on the blockchain.
Okay. So EOS is a proof of stake protocol.
Yeah,
Versus-
delegated proof of stake.
Okay.
And that's the third point that they took it a step further. So to be able to scale and be able to have 1,000, like they were claiming to be able to do 100,000 transactions or up to 1 million transactions a second, as opposed to Ethereum, which is at 12 transactions a second, or Bitcoin, which is 6 transactions per second maximum.
Right.
To be able to get to that high, there need to be like some type of delegated proof of stake where you delegate block producers.
Yeah.
And you vote these block producers, and EOS chose to be 21 block producers,
Yeah.
and they become like super nodes.
Yeah.
So rather than have every node in the network be part of the block production, it really slows down the network. So you just have it's like a social experiment really. You have the whole network vote in these super nodes, and they're the ones that produce the blocks, and that really gives them the ability to have super high transactions because you're able to delegate who's going to be able to produce the blocks.
Okay, now is that called sharding or something like that?
Yeah, the Ethereum's solution to the scalability is sharding.
Okay.
Techie talk. Sharding.
Well, I mean,
okay. Define sharding. Like,
Fine Bambi.
right?
Oh my god.
That's the best word for it.
So, I mean, what's interesting is we're going to have Mohammed El-Kandri, CEO of the Fast Access blockchain, which is a project happening here in Toronto. And they too are claiming to have, I think, millions of transactions a second. And it kind of is like, I mean, that's an important thing, right? I mean, when you think that Ethereum only allows 12 transactions a second, I mean, that sounds like it could be a roadblock, you know, or a block to scalability.
So being able to do thousands of transactions per second becomes... So wait a minute. So, I mean, what I'm hearing between, like, the conversation that we had previously around the transition of Bitcoin to Ethereum to now EOS, do you really envision this as sort of becoming the next ledger-based system that it's the next economic system for sort of transaction, for money transfer? Is this what this is really
Well, yeah, that and a lot more.
all about?
Yeah.
Plus, so enlighten me.
Yeah, we really don't know where blockchain's going to go, but we see every generation that they're solving new problems. Like each blockchain solving new problems and tackling new issues. And like 10 years down the line, I don't know where blockchain will be. I don't know if it's going to be EOS or another blockchain. But what I do know is that we're at the very beginning stage of how blockchain is going to affect our lives.
And how it can be used. Is that it? Like in real time? Because this is the thing. I think there's all of this conversation about stuff and people are going crazy and mining and blah. But what are we really using it for right now?
So what it really is, if you look at applications or the whole computers and technology, it's built upon layer. We start off with like the hardware layer and then the network layer, protocol layer, and then application.
Right.
Blockchain's another layer that sits that will sit underneath applications, and it just gives us the ability to have decentralized applications, and that really affects us socially as human beings. Because for so long we wanted to avoid like having a big brother or some type of controlled power that makes all our decisions and can have a monetary policy that creates inflation. People like to have like transparency and the ability to truly have a democratic society. And that's really what blockchain gives us. And so what we're doing is just developing a protocol layer. And that is here to stay, and it's going to be, at one point in the future, it's going to be just something that's used seamlessly in the background, such as your RAM on your computer or hard drive. You're not even going to be aware of it, but I feel like that's really the future of blockchain.
So it's a protocol layer that essentially people like myself or whomever can figure out like how we want to apply that protocol layer. Like there are ways that we can tap that protocol layer to do whatever. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think the average user is going to actually even be aware that they're transacting in the blockchain in the future. It's just going to be like just another, like, do you know how TCP works, the protocol, or HTTP? Like, there's so many things that we don't understand about the computer, but they're just built upon layers, and we just transact with them without even paying attention. They're just part of our lives.
But it's like the real promise of blockchain is kind of like, I'm just trying to build on what you just said. It's like, when we have our money, our Canadian dollar now, it's managed by the Bank of Canada. So what happens if the Bank of Canada mismanages it? We have no input into how that happens. If they mismanage the Canadian dollar, then every person who lives within the Canadian economy, every company could suffer, right? So what the blockchain does, it allows us to create decentralized currencies. And in fact, it allows anyone to create a currency and then try to manage that ecosystem successfully, right? So we don't have to be subject to a centralized authority that might screw things up for us, essentially.
Right. So like it's like a Visa, essentially. Like before Visa became like widespread, you've you can create a network of consumers or whatever it is around that currency.
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, yeah, but it's much more than currency. It's also applications now.
Exactly.
It's, you know.
Yeah.
So, so Ahmed, I just want to ask about. I mean, you decided to kind of go with EOS, and I heard some good things about EOS. Have they actually launched their blockchain? Can you actually build on it now?
Yeah, the mainnet was launched on June 1st, and it took about 14 days for the community to get up to 15% votes.
Okay.
So they had to vote on the block producers of the network, and it had to reach 15% of all the total EOS tokens available, and then 15% of them had to say, okay, these are the 21 that we're going to delegate to be our block production, and that took about 14 days. And a lot of people had a problem with that. They're like, oh, it should have been a lot quicker, but that's really like true consensus. Like, it's up to the community how fast it goes, and there was a problem with the launch because there weren't any voting tools because it's a very new concept. So people who didn't understand the technology, like the being able to vote using the DOS terminal, they were waiting for the applications to come out so it allowed you to vote. So it had a problem with it to really start off their network.
Okay.
But now, as of the 14th, you're able to completely program and develop on the main network. But then they ran into another issue because of the you had to purchase RAM. RAM is like the memory that is going to host your application. There's a lot of RAM speculators that entered the market and purchased all of the available blockchain at RAM. So they ran into the issue of, like, if you wanted to create a new account on the EOS, it would cost you anywhere about $40 American. So there were all these like issues that they were just tackling one by one.
And they may not have foreseen them all either. I mean, that RAM one sounds like, never thought of that. Right?
Yeah. But just to clarify that point is they are, because it's a community-based effort, after discussions occurred, like worldwide discussions between the block producers, between the community, they come up with good solutions and then they vote those solutions in based on the mechanism, like voting mechanism that's available on the EOS, which is what the third generation blockchains are doing, is having some type of governance built in the blockchain so you don't have to hard fork every time there's like a division idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, how are you... I mean, I'm just thinking, how do you feel about this? I mean, you said that this is EOS is like a third generation blockchain project now, but now we're even here, and we're going to have Mohammed on in a couple of minutes now, talking about the fast access blockchain, and we had a fellow here from one called Definity. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, but again, they're very fast, like millions of transactions per second. It just seems that there's so much innovation happening that, and now Ethereum almost, I hate to say it, but it sounds like it's sort of like way old, right? It's like things are changing so quickly that it's almost like by the time you invest even mind share in a new blockchain technology, there's something new that's coming out that's bigger and better and brighter.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel about all that?
Yeah, you really don't know where blockchains are going to go. Like Ethereum, by 2020, they're going to introduce sharding, which is going to increase your scalability. So the good news about this space is that it's so early, it's so new, that if you start early enough, you can be part of like this the wave of the Google in the garage, or the Amazon that was still in the garage in the development phase. So really, it's an exciting period. I feel like the reason why we chose EOS, I want to tackle that issue, is because they were able to start from scratch, whereas Ethereum had to work upon the foundation they've already created. EOS has a huge community, worldwide community. The way they launched their main net was really a global effort, whereas we've seen in the past, like, blockchains were really launched by one group, sort of like a centralized launch.
Well, a centralized 1%, sort of.
Yeah,
well, which
like
kind
XRP or Ripple.
It kind of goes against the whole idea of blockchain, which is decentralized. Try not to have one
sort of
potential
entity.
point of failure,
Yeah, right.
which could be the entity that's
started
governing it,
exactly.
or whatever.
And it was really beautiful how EOS, I really admired the way they did it. They created the code and they said, okay, it's up to the community to launch this blockchain. and then all of the, like, we have EOS Canada in Montreal, we had block producers in Japan, China, South America, Europe. All of these organizations are across the world that came together and they launched this application.
Well, it
So
sounds
they have a huge
sounds
community.
far more. It sounds like an upgrade compared to what I've heard of like the previous systems that are currently available, right? Like Ethereum and Bitcoin. I've been looking into it a little bit to educate myself, but part of the challenge that I had was like, well, this is still very much based off of a three-dimensional system, right? With like an entity that started up the whole thing, and like I get that, people have the opportunity to code on it or whatever, but just like you said, if you don't understand the language of Ethereum, you can't code. So this seems like, okay, if we're talking about outsourcing and decentralizing like this application, having as many bodies contributing to it as possible becomes the currency, essentially, right?
The community involved is a really
100%.
big factor.
Yeah.
And that's what the problem is with a lot of the other blockchains that are being developed. They haven't really figured
They
out
don't
how to
have
get
the
that
manpower.
community.
Yeah, the political will of the community.
Or the users, yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
the ecosystem, however you want to define that. That includes users, every aspect of it.
Right.
Okay, so Ahmed, so you're running this meetup in Toronto. I mean, who's watching this should consider maybe getting in touch, signing up for the meetup, coming out to some of your events.
Yeah. So we have two goals. Our first goal is to get talented programmers to help us create the next decentralized applications. So just like the next Uber, the next Google, all sorts of decentralized applications. But we're also looking to get access to real industry knowledge, such as lawyers, healthcare professionals, pharmacists, doctors, people who know a lot about the real world, about a specific industry, and they have a problem and they feel like somehow a decentralized solution would resolve it. So we're looking for industry-specific partners or just enthusiasts that want to learn more, because we also want to help educate the public about where the future is going, how it's going to look like, because if there aren't every like regular consumers using the blockchain, then it's just made for the developers. And
So it sounds like maybe there are, in a sense, really no prerequisites necessary to join the group, because the coders, they could be any kind of coder that can code in a language they already know that can easily be translated onto the EOS blockchain, right? But also, like you said, industry people that may not have any coding or technical skills, but they have a business problem that might be able to be solved by a decentralized app of some sort on EOS. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And we had a lawyer actually at our last meetup on Sunday, and he had a very solid idea, a solid problem that exists in Canada, and he's pretty sure across the world. And we're discussing more about the problem with him and the solution, and to have access to that would be great. And he can be a part of, actually starting a solution for that that's spread across the world. So it's
Okay.
Wow, that's
Okay.
cool.
Very cool. So,
When is the meetup?
we usually do on Sundays. We have another one coming up on the 15th at 12 o'clock.
of July, and how do people sign up for it?
At our meetup.com/cryptoleos.
Cryptal EOS. Okay. Well, Ahmed, this is great. Thank you for coming in. We should get you back. I mean, this is like, I feel like we could probably talk for a couple hours about some of these issues.
It's very enlightening.
So let's,
I'll see you on Sunday.
so come back. Come back sometime, and we're going to take a little break. And I think Mohammed is probably in the other room, and we're going to talk about the fast access blockchain, which will be a great little follow-up to this
to
one.
this conversation.
Yeah, so we'll be right back at channel.com.
Thank you for having me.